Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at Restoration Church Online. We are so glad that you are here. Thanks for being here and tuning in. My name is Kurt.
And I'm Katie, and we are the pastors here at Restoration Church. And we are in week 4 of our Heart of the Matter series here at Restoration Church Online. And we have been exploring together the idea that God invites us to live and love from the core of who we are. That our heart is more valuable to God than we may even know, and is more valuable and important in our relationships than we may even have guessed.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're actually going to be exploring the idea about how do we have good communication in our relationships, right? How do we talk to each other? How do we hear each other, right? And I just want to say from the front, right, and this, guys, if you're paying attention, this is for you. This is for free. Communication is not just verbal. Right? We've probably all learned that the hard way at some point. Right? But there's more to it than that. What we're exploring today is not just what we say, but our communication style, how our words really come out of the condition of our heart, and that influences our relationships in a major way and can definitely have an impact on those that we love.
Yeah, and I mean, today we want to actually peel back some of the layers in our own relationship, right? And share a little bit with you about what we've learned about communication along the way, right? We were friends for a few years back in college, and then we started dating for about 2.5 years and got engaged, and the summer after we graduated. But now this summer we will be celebrating 15 years of marriage.
That's right. Feel free to send gifts.
Yeah. So from our collective, 2 decades of being in relationship with one another, one thing has become clear, that we are not perfect, right? We have had many highs and many lows, just like any relationship. But through the years, we have learned how to navigate the ups and downs of how to communicate with one another, right? Sometimes effectively, and other times not so much. Keeping it real with y'all. But we have learned a ton along the way.
Yeah, we did not start out like oddly natural great communicators. I mean, we were 19, right, when we met. So we had learned things and we brought those into our relationship. And I mean, to be honest, I was pretty passive aggressive. Katie was perfect.
Far
maybe not. Okay, no. So maybe a little assumptive, right? But I remember in college, there was so many times that my mode of communication was posting dashboard confessional lyrics on my AOL Instant Messenger away message.
Millennial peeps, where you at?
Where you at? Right? If you don't know what AOL IM is, you missed out on a fabulously troublesome time for relationships. But yeah, we love being millennials. I'm keeping my skinny jeans. You rock that side part. We lived through Jinko, right? We survived. I ain't going back, right? So we're going to bring back IM. Kurt Ibanez, hit me up.
Oh my gosh, great Kate's 83.
There it is.
Right? Well, all jokes aside and all that to say, we have come a long way, and we have learned how to recognize patterns that we both brought into our relationship, right? That were alive and at work in our lives. Some of those we were conscious of, and others we were unconscious of, that affects the other person. And then we've also developed relational habits through the bumps and bruises along the way, right? And through it all, God has taught us a ton, right? Through His grace, through plenty of humble and honest conversations with each other and with our therapists, we have learned to communicate better with each other as time has gone, and how to navigate some of those big feeling discussions. AKA fights, right? Whatever you want to call it. Fights, big feelings.
We have had a few of those strong word, big feeling type of conversations. We definitely have. And the hope is today, as we kind of talk about this, that we can learn how we can communicate. And when you communicate with someone in a relationship, or when you have someone that you're in a relationship with, and have you ever had this feeling that you kind of have the same fight over and over again? Right? In the moment, it feels unique. You can even be surprised by it. But our hope is that those fights can actually become much less intense and even less common through what we're going to discuss today. In fact, Dr. John Gottman, who is a world-renowned marriage and family therapist, he's done years and years and years of research on relationships and specifically relational breakdowns. He actually writes that the top 5 most common issues that people fight about, no matter what their age, no matter how long they've been in a relationship, the top 5 things that people fight about are shockingly consistent. Right? So if you and your significant other have had one of those big feeling discussions in just the last couple months around one of these areas, hit it up in the comments. Raise your hand. Group
Vulnerability
therapy
vault.
session, right?
Here we
The
go.
first one is free time. How do we spend our time? What do you get to do? Who gets free time and when? Like, that's a big one that people fight about. We have had that big feeling discussion even this week. The second one is about money and our budget, right? Like, how do we spend money? Why are all these Amazon Prime boxes showing up? Whatever it might be, I don't know. If you have that fight, actually next week we are starting a brand new series called When Money Talks, and we would invite you to be a part of that, and we can help solve that fight for you, right? We can't do all five, but we'll take care of that one.
Stick around next week.
Stick around, come on back. The third area that he discovered that most people in relationships consistently fight about is that like home work kind of dynamic, right? What do we do when someone's at home and someone's at work? How do I balance that individually? How do we balance that as a couple? Who takes what responsibilities? And often it can feel like many people have this sense of, I'm always doing this and you never contribute, and vice versa. That's not true for us. No, just kidding. We have had that conversation as well. The fourth area that couples and people in relationship consistently have conversations around is physical intimacy or sex. How do we desire each other? How do we talk about the things we want, similar to what we talked about a couple weeks ago? And you might be thinking, if you're single or dating or newly married, wait, you fight about that? Like, you want to? Yes, conversation over, right? So, but for those of us that have been married for a long time, we know that that can be an area that we have to have conversations about over and over and over again. It can even be a source of tension. And for all of us, we can raise our hands and be honest, saying we've had that conversation, right? We have had to go through that fight together. And the fifth area is extended family, right? So if you're watching with your parents-in-law or whatever, you don't have to raise your hand in the comments, that's okay. But when to see them, how often to see them, how to engage. Family dynamics might be different from the family that you were raised in, right? What different dynamics come into play? How do we communicate with them? How often to see them? All that kind of stuff. I mean, these are the 5 areas that people consistently fight about, according to Dr. John Gottman. And ultimately, beyond just the 5 topics that he discovered in his research, he also determined that actually about 70% of conflicts in relationships are never solved or resolved fully. I mean, this is challenging, right? This means that we are returning to and recycling the same patterns.
It's not the kind of recycling that I want to do.
Not at all, right? We are recycling the same patterns, the same fights over and over again. I mean, same stuff, different day, right? And perhaps you've felt that way. Why do we always fight about this, babe? Why do we always come back to this same thing? I know we can easily get misunderstood when we talk about this one topic. Why is that? And this is what we're talking about today. This is why this is so important when we discuss communication.
Yeah. And so what we hope happens today is that as we discuss communication, that there would be a shift in your relationship. Yeah. Right? Whether you're single, dating, married, or single again, right? We all are in relationships, and when we get better at communication with others, both of us actually win. But if we really want to do that, it's going to take more than just trying harder. Because if we could just do better, right, we would have done better by now, right? In fact, Jesus told his first followers, and I believe he invites us to understand this in a deeper way, that what's going on in our hearts actually informs how we speak, right? That our communication begins within before it ever comes out of our mouth, right? In Luke 6, verse 45, Jesus is recorded as saying this to his friends, that people are known in the same way, out of the virtue stored up in their hearts. Good and upright people will produce good fruit, but out of the evil hidden within their hearts, evil ones will produce what is evil. Right? For the overflow of what has been stored up in your heart will be seen by your fruit and will be heard in your words. Right? Whew, that one's a little weighty, right? And Jesus is giving us a picture here that the best place to figure out how to fix your communication is not out there, but again is in here, in our heart, in the core of who we are. And it actually affects how we communicate with our heart, whether we just mean it or not, right? Jesus uses the illustration of our heart producing fruit, right? This agricultural illustration actually implies that there is so much work to do. We often think that it's more fun to focus on your flaws than it is to pay attention to my own flaws. But the invitation from Jesus here is to examine what is actually coming out of your heart, right? Because real relationships can be hard, right? Marriage, dating, whatever, right? And starting a relationship is so much easier than actually growing a life-giving relationship, right? And if you want to have transforming relationships, if you don't want to get stuck in the same patterns, that same cycle of fights, the same recycled fights over and and over again, we have to bring in new understanding. We have to understand that in every relationship, both people have work to do. I have work, you have work.
Yeah.
I mean,
Lot of work.
we have a lot of work to do together, right? And if we are committed to looking at what is happening in our hearts and looking at the way that we communicate with each other, right? Honestly examining what is working, then we have to be honest enough to say that when I focus on the flaws in you, I miss the work that God is inviting me to. Right, I'm going to say that again. Right? If I focus only on the work that you have to do, I miss out on the work that God is inviting me into.
Yeah, I mean, you can share the work with someone else. You can share about how you're growing and what you're pursuing. You can even work on some problems together. But if I only focus on you, I will miss on what God is wanting to do in me. If you've ever found yourself saying, if he could just get over that anger problem, or if she would just be less flighty, or if you would just set better boundaries with your mom, or if you would just pursue me more, then we would be better. You are in that spot where we are missing the point. And I remember we've dealt with this, right? We were early on in our relationship, being married, and we were exploring some new territory in our life. And you decided that you wanted to go to therapy, to go see a counselor, to kind of process some of the things that you were facing. And I was so proud of you. Like, it was so honorable. And I remember, like, I wanted to pretend that I was in counseling too, and I would kind of like use some of the same phrases that I heard you say.
You're such a counseling poser.
Yeah, it was totally an act. It didn't do anything. It was just like a contact high, right, of counseling. And then I realized I'm not actually going to get better until I do my own work myself, right? You can't do it for me, right? And I can't do it for you. I have to choose to do it myself. And in fact, specifically when it comes to communication, in Matthew 13, Jesus tells a story that creates a beautiful framework around how we can do our own work of exploring what is the status of our heart when it comes to our communication. Now, perhaps you've heard this passage before and may have been taught that it only specifically applies to how people receive the gospel message, but it's actually much bigger than that in context. And Jesus describes this to his followers afterwards and kind of explains it to them. He says this is actually about the condition of your heart and how that affects your relationships, specifically when it comes to communication. So whether you're in a thriving relationship or a struggling relationship, right? Whether you just got out of a relationship or you're longing for a relationship, or if you're honest, you are regretting your last relationship, this passage is for us. So in Matthew 13, starting in verse 3, it says this: He, meaning Jesus, told many stories in the form of parables, such as this one. He says, listen, a farmer went out to plant some seeds, as farmers do, right? And he scattered them out in his field, and some of the seeds fell on hardened footpath, and the birds came up and ate them. Other seeds fell onto shallow soil with underlying rock. These seeds sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow, but the plants soon wilted under the hot sun. Since they didn't have deep roots, they died. Other seeds fell among the thorns that grew up and choked out the tender young plants. And still others fell on fertile soil, and they produced a crop that was 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as had been planted. Now look, this farmer was not very intentional. He's just kind of throwing stuff around, right? But you and I, we can actually be very intentional about what kind of soil we have in our heart, and we are going to determine that that is how our communication really is well received or not, and that can have a drastic impact on our relationships.
Right, so how do each of these four types of soil translate in our communication, in our relationships? Right, first, let's look at the hardened path, right? Where you are maybe cold or judgmental, or you have an air of superiority instead of speaking with compassion in relationships. Now, ladies, I'm going to lean in a little bit, because so often we can fall into patterns of just getting nitpicky or critical about things, or just kind of assuming that, like, my way, and that I'm just sort of like the slave driver just calling the shots. I'll speak for myself. That can tend to be a hang-up in our communication, where I take on this role of coach instead of partner.
Yeah, but at the same time, I know for me, that can be a space where if I don't get what I want, or if I feel defensive, I can shut off. And I learned that pattern young when I didn't get what I wanted growing up. And so even in a relationship, I've had to overcome, or you've constantly had to invite me back to the table when I would rather kind of jump away, right? Yeah. So we all have work to do in that space. The second one, right, is that shallow soil, where you might spring up and show signs of life quickly, but then you wilt under the heat of the sun. The pressures of life. And I know for me, like I can definitely have that temptation. We talked about it even with the idea of, faux counseling, right? Like I want to look great on the outside. I want our relationship to be fine. And I can quickly go into, I'm fine, we're fine, everything's fine. Let's just keep talking about it. Don't brush that under the rug. And you have been such a gift to me in that process to actually consistently ask the question, well, what's underneath there?
Yeah.
Like, where's the root? What's that coming from? And that's been such a transformative space for our communication as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. I mean, next let's jump into the thorns, right? Or
Thorny brambles.
Thorny brambles, right? Or weeds, in some translation calls it that. But when we look at the soil that is covered by weeds, right? That these seeds, instead of being able to sprout, like they get choked out. Right, and so for me in communication, this makes me think of anxiety or stress, or where in our relationships are we holding stress? Where in our relationships do we allow anxiety to kind of take on this front seat in our house, right? It's something that we say around our home a lot, or like in our relationship, is that stress is a choice, right? So often when we get spun out, or we feel like we're going crazy, or we eventually come back around and it's like, now I'm just stressed that I'm stressed, or I'm resentful or mad that I feel like, one of us feels like we're pulling more weight than the other. We're both 3s on the Enneagram, so that can tend to have a little bit, especially with this one, right? The anxiety can have that effect where it begins to kind of squelch out the good growth. Yeah. It begins to kind of choke out the good that is there. So I feel like when we get in these spots in our relationship, it's a good question to ask, where are you anxious? Right? The thorns can represent the cares of this world, right? That can choke out the good growth, right? What are you stressed out about? How does that affect the way that you speak to each other? Do you come across as blamey, right? Are you just feeling stressed, but then the other person seems to take offense to it, or get aggressive back? Where are the spaces where you want it to be your own way because you're too stressed or you're too anxious to see the other person, right? You see the circumstances instead of your partner, or the person that you're in relationship with.
A lot of times that anxiety, it just takes someone asking some person in the relationship going, hey, are we okay? Like, what are you afraid of? Yeah. And to be able to admit that there is fear at play underneath whatever it is that feels blamey or aggressive or anxious, and to bring that together and go, I'm afraid of this, or I'm nervous about this thing at work, or about whatever it might be between you. It might even be something that you guys are anxious about within the relationship, but it is out there, but it's affecting the relationship because we can't name it.
Yeah.
The last one is obviously fertile soil. And the good news here is that you actually have this in you as well, right? There is places where maybe you even surprised yourself with your ability to be communicative and compassionate and caring. And we know that this is true, that those moments have a bountiful harvest that is 30, 60, 100 times over, that can even cover over the harder parts of our conversations and the harder spaces of our lack of good communication. And while that's great and you want to own that and celebrate that, it's not something that you want to say, oh, let's just get to that next thing and forget those other places that we have work to do. I mean, this is the space where I know that for many of us, we have had this in the last few months where you find yourself being extra intentional. You just find yourself asking great questions. You get to the thing underneath the thing. And harvest is always hard work, right? We think about this beautiful concept of, oh, I'm just reaping what I've sown. But really, you just get what you've sown, right? And so are you sowing into your relationship where you have intentional direction with your communication to maximize the fertile soil? Because there is going to be spaces in life where you find yourself in thorny spots, where you find yourself in hard moments, where you're squelched out by the sun and the pressures of life. We've all been in the pressure cooker of 2020 and COVID realities and all that. And relationships have felt it and been affected by it. But in those spaces where you can find fertile soil, live in that, enjoy that,
Celebrate.
have those moments together in your relationship. Don't gloss over those, really live into them.
Yeah, that's great. And this is why this matters, right? What would happen if you could just name what kind of soil you are at any moment of your life, right? If you could just say, hey babe, I'm sorry, I am just feeling like hardened soil right now because of fill in the blank, right? So I'm not really going to be able to have a ton of empathy right now. It's just such a hard day. Right. Or I'm super stressed about work and finances, and I know that our communication seems to get choked out really quick whenever we're kind of in this space. So what if we could just like take a deep breath, not like to sweep it under the rug and pretend everything's fine, but what if we could just table this conversation until tomorrow, get a good night's sleep, right? Or, I know that thing, it easily offends me. I just want you to know I'm working on it.
Yeah.
That between us, you can count on me that I'm going to do the work to right size my anger or to shift when I start feeling like I'm spiraling out in anxiety.
Yeah, and see, when we pay attention to what type of soil we are, what we're bringing to the conversation, and what kind of soil we are having conversation with, it will improve how we communicate. And it may even feel daunting right now. Like, let's be honest. Like, it feels a little sermony. Like, oh yeah, I'm doing this kind of soil today, and it might feel weird. But if you use this framework, the more you use it, the more comfortable it will become. And really the bottom line is, are we taking the time? Am I taking the time? Am I willing to ask the questions to make this relationship work? No matter how long it takes, no matter how much it takes from me, am I committed to making this relationship work, to do my own work and to work together on this relationship, to work together on our communication? Because the truth is, don't miss this, a relationship that works is worth the work.
Yeah.
The relationship that works is worth the work that you have to put in. Yeah. While we each pursue our own work, right? While you do your work and I do my work, we do work together. We are hopeful that God would do a work in us. As you work on your relationships, God will do a work in you, in your life, in your marriage, in your roommate situation, in our church, a work of peace, a work of restoration, a work of hope and healing, that we actually don't step into this on our own, but that we are really following Jesus to ask the question, am I willing to explore my own heart? Because I do communicate from my heart, whether I like what comes out or not. It starts in here. And so can I assess, what kind of soil am I? What am I bringing to this conversation? What am I bringing to our communication? What am I bringing to this relationship? And can I bring that first and foremost to God, and then to you, or to whoever you're in a relationship with, and see if that doesn't help us improve.
Yeah. I mean, friends, what kind of church would we be? What kind of community would we be if we are committed to navigating our inner world and bringing the very best, right? That doesn't mean that there won't be conflict, right?
Totally.
Because when we're being honest, right, there will be rough edges that we need to sharpen one another. But I dream of the kind of restorative community we would become if our marriages, if our relationships, if our dating relationships, our relationships with our kids, I mean, this impacts every sphere of our life, right? If we were the kind of community that was known for communicating well, for speaking life, for speaking well of one another, and for fighting for the relationship rather than fighting with each other, right? In order to get to that point where we're strong and, united, it takes the ability to say, no, I'm going to show up. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to fight for this relationship. So I hope and pray that we can step boldly into this work together. I know that it is hard fought and hard won, but when you start to experience the fruit, right? When you start to experience that good fruit in your relationship, like we said, it is worth it. So I want to pray for us as a community as we commit to stepping into this work together this week. So I invite you to pray with me. Father God, thank you so much that you desire for us to have good relationships. So much so that you gave us your son, Jesus, who came to show us what humanity was supposed to look like, fully alive, free in you, God. So I just pray for everyone who's hearing this message today, God, that you would give each of us a new restored sense of boldness and ability and resilience to fight the good fight when it comes to our relationships, God, to show up, to do our work, whatever kind of soil we are, God. I pray that each and every one of us would be led by your Spirit to take the next step, to show up in our relationships, ready to love one another, ready to put even some of our own pride or our own fear to the side to say, I'm going to work on this relationship because it's worth it. So God, would you just restore each and every one of us, God, who are maybe feeling weary, who are needing a fresh refilling of your Spirit, God. We just thank you and we praise you. And I pray over all of the relationships, whether married, dating, single, or single again, God, would you just restore us to be more and more of who you created us to be. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, we are so glad that you tuned in and joined us as we wrapped up this series. And before we continue in our worship experience with one last song, we want to have a time to actually respond to God through financial generosity. And we do this every time that we gather because it is a way to worship by stepping in and participating in the mission of what God is doing here at Restoration Church. And not only is like broadcasts like this and all the experiences, but stuff for kids and marriage counseling and classes and all the ways that we love and serve our community. It's all made possible because of your generosity. And so we just want to say thank you. For those of you that invest financially into what God is doing here, thank you, thank you, thank you. In this incredibly challenging year, you have gone above and beyond, and we are so grateful. And so I would encourage you, Restoration Church is your home. God is your Father, and this is the mission that you want to get behind. Would you join us? You can give 3 different ways. You can go to restorationchurchsd.com/give. You can set up one-time or reoccurring giving right there. It's totally safe, totally secure. You can do it in 2 minutes or less. It's how we choose to give, so our family participates in this mission as well. If you have your cell phone, you can text any amount to the number 84321. You'll get a text back. Just follow that text prompt to select Restoration Church as your giving destination. Or you can mail a check here to our building in San Diego if you prefer to give that way. Again, if you're just joining us for the first time, you're just checking out God, checking out Restoration Church, don't feel any obligation to give. We hope that this was helpful and meaningful and powerful for you. We hope your relationships improve. But if this is your church home, we are so grateful for your participation with us through your giving.